Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. And well guys, here we are today for another video, this time with Path of Exile, and take in consideration that I'm no expert in Path of Exile, really. I believe that I've played Path of Exile 2 more just yesterday than I played the whole time of Path of Exile 1, but I was really waiting for Path of Exile 2 due to several reasons, but especially due to the gameplay. It just feels very, very nice. The animations, the graphics, everything, the atmosphere is just very, very good. So for this first video, I'm gonna test it both with the RTX 4080 Super in this computer and the RX 7900 XTX on that one. And I'm gonna test it once again, 1080p, 1440p, 1440p ultra-wide and 4K. And I will also show you several settings like DLSS quality, DLSS performance and so on, depending on the scenario. So first of all, I must say that I really enjoy the game, and this is my character, I guess. So character, it's the C, I always forget. This is my character, AG Pisco, kind of not a rogue, what's the mercenary, exactly, the mercenary. And I'm currently just in the red veil. There are some monsters here and I have some skills. For example, look at the animations. Look at the reloading here. So nice, it's simple but very nice. Gives way better atmosphere. We have like a shotgun. Great. As for the graphics, we're running maximum settings 1080p, no upscaling whatsoever. So as you can see, no upscale, 1080p. And the graphics with a card like this makes no sense to use anything other than maximum. So yeah, it's at absolute maximum settings here. It's currently running at 190 FPS, and it seems that even though we're running the 9800X 3D, which is one of the fastest CPUs that you can get, or the fastest CPU in terms of gaming, and this is my cat. Yeah, it's still running like 190, 194, something like that. Just won't go. As you can see, look at the skills, for example. I actually have a passive now that when I hit an arrow, it will kind of lock or bind the opponent to the ground. Look at this. Shotgun for you guys. And now, one of the things that I like the most about Path of Exile is that you can now use the keyboard to move the character instead of being mouse only. Oh, my bad. So, I'm moving the character with WASD, as you can see, and the mouse is alone, which is one of the things that I like the most about Path of Exile 2. But in terms of FPS, yeah, 190, it seems that it doesn't go much over that, or over that at all, and that's due, of course, due to the CPU, I believe, but it's 1080p and maximum settings. At 1440p, we're roughly at 130 FPS, again, but the game looks much better already without any kind of upscaler. We do have some glitches here and there, but look at these tiny details. The physics, nice. We can see kind of some shimmering. And this is without any upscaling, so the shimmering is not an upscaling issue. It's just basically due to the TAA implementation that sucks a bit. But it's just on the character. As soon as you move, the shimmering goes away. But yeah, looks much better. And now we're getting around 130 FPS. And remember, this is a heavy area, and the game is still kind of in beta, needs more time. But still, very, very good. Looks great, the atmosphere is great, the graphics is great. We're running global illumination, so it's basically everything on the maximum. Again, global illumination, as you can see. Ultra GI as well, ultra global illumination. As soon as you go for lower global illumination, of course that the game will perform better. But it is not needed on a GPU like this. You can just go to the maximum settings if you want to. My native resolution, we go to 1440p ultra-wide and we go down to 108 FPS, which is not that bad considering we're running at maximum settings, like absolute maximum. 115. Yep. What's this?
That must be what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it must be that checkpoint. Oh, great. Yeah, but it performs very well. Over 100 FPS with no upscaling whatsoever, and a gorgeous looking game. Really, the game just looks very good. It is hard to show you how good it looks because, again, it's just a video, but it looks very good. So now we're supposedly running at 4K, but I guess something's wrong because I was running at 1440p ultra wide and I actually had less FPS. Maybe it is using some kind of upscaling. And no, it seems to actually be the case. That makes absolutely no sense. Unless we're going or driving into some kind of weird odd engine bottleneck with lower resolutions, it makes no sense that I have more FPS at 4K than at lower resolutions. Absolutely zero sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Again, this is either an engine bottleneck or some other bottleneck that I don't really know about. But something really odd is happening, that's for sure. More FPS at 4K than 1440p ultra wide. Now we're running 1080p once again, and at 1080p we go up to 200 FPS, that's fine. Now let's see if we really have a CPU bottleneck, because if it is a CPU bottleneck, going and using upscaling mode like the DLSS, I mean, won't really, yeah, and there isn't a CPU bottleneck, it's kind of an engine bug, because as soon as I use the DLSS, the FPS shot up to 260. And by the way, using the DLSS, and I made a post about this on X, and using the DLSS here, as you can see, in terms of stability, temporal stability, it is actually better. So we have less shimmering in the character, especially in the character, as soon as we use the DLSS. But as soon as we use the DLSS, we also lose some, and I can even take off, yeah, I can even take off some sharpness, but we do lose some detail that we have in terms of transparency, in terms of translucent pixels, for example. Look at this. As you can see here, the image is kind of dull. In the foliage and so on, it looks kind of dull. And as soon as we disable the DLSS, as you can see, we have more light and so on. And this happens at higher resolutions. So it's not a thing. And with every upscaler, not only with the DLSS, it happens the same way with FSR. So DLSS, for example, the image looks kind of dull. As soon as we go to XTX, it's even worse actually. And as soon as we go to FSR, we need to increase the sharpness way more. And it's still kind of dull compared to, no, as you can see, kind of more reflections. We have more reflections without upscaling. As soon as we enable upscaling, those reflections kind of go away. So no upscaling, as you can see, reflections, DLSS, no reflections. The reflections and shadows and occlusion get worse with the DLSS, so take that in consideration. Even if you use the LAA, it's exactly the same. The reflections are still worse than using no upscaling whatsoever. But yeah, it works fine, 200 and something FPS, 260. Doesn't look good, but feels good because of the 260 FPS, definitely. Now back to 1440p, we're hovering around 150 FPS in this particular scenario, since it is lighter than the previous one. But as soon as we go and use upscaling the DLSS, again the image kind of stays dull. So it is not just because of 1080p. Look, we have way more reflections on the shield, more reflections here. Look, the dynamic shadows there. As soon as we enable DLSS, yeah, we still have the dynamic shadows, but look at this. It's just, the image is just way duller than it should be. Again, reflections, culling, ambient occlusion, DLSS disables that, and the image just looks generally worse. When using the DLSS quality, we can still go up to 200 FPS, which I believe is more than enough for most people. Whoa. Chill out, boy. But yeah, 200 FPS if you want to use the DLSS quality, but again, you will lose some details. Take that in consideration. As we go to 4K, we have around 130 FPS again. I don't really know why. As soon as we go to the DLSS quality, bam, we have the same FPS. And I knew that 4K was bugged, at least in my monitor, in my system. I knew that 4K was bugged. I knew it because it couldn't have more FPS than the previous. So quality balanced 48, but well, at least balanced is giving more performance. If I want to go 4K performance, I can go up to 170 FPS, which is quite okay. But again, oh, look at the buckets, for example, or the shields. You see the amount of detail that we lose with the DLSS? Even if we use the DLSS quality, the amount of detail is just, yeah, we lose a lot of it. And this is due to the DLSS algorithm, and they need to change this, but yeah. And well guys, here we are now in another computer, and now with the Ryzen 5 7600X 3D and the 7900 XT, and we're running in a slightly different part, so I can tell you that it is a bit heavier here. It is a bit heavier, and we're running at 1080p once again, 1080p maximum settings, and yeah. So let me just show you for you to see 1080p absolute maximum settings with global illumination set to ultra and so on, and yeah, I mean the game is running at 160 FPS, which is not really insane, is not optimal for some, but for me 160 FPS is more than enough. But again, we're running at 1080p, so I would assume that's at least what we should have in a game like this with a card like the 7900 XTX, sorry. But yeah, 1080p running perfectly fine even at maximum settings, and I'm not even trying other settings because I mean, it's a 7900 XTX, it's the top of the top of all tiers, let's call it that, the best card from AMD, so it should perform well. 170 FPS here, but if you want to see in terms of global illumination, for example, the difference that it does, because it does a difference, as you can see, as soon as we go global illumination to low, we immediately go to 240 FPS. That's how global illumination does and makes the difference. It's just insane. Let me just show you here, for example, but in terms of detail, it also looks way worse than ultra. As soon as we go to ultra, as you can see, the details, the occlusion, the shadows that we have there, it's much different. So 170, global illumination lower, 240, so you can still have pretty good graphics and way higher FPS if you set the global illumination to low. This works. Now, as for the lighting, and sorry, I'm doing this because the camera is in front of the settings. As soon as we go, for example, for the GI high, so kind of a mid-tier, mid-setting, we still have great graphics and we have 230 FPS. So maybe you should consider decreasing the global illumination quality to high instead of ultra if you really want to have the best graphics available, because as soon as we go to ultra, it does make the difference. We do have more occlusion, but the FPS also tank. But it is what it is. So 1440p maximum settings, and we have 120 something, 120, 140, depends on the situations, but in this case here, in this part of the map, 120, which is quite understandable actually. Bam. Bam. And yeah, 120 FPS, more than enough. As soon as we go and we change, once again, the global illumination quality to low, we immediately go to 190. And if we set to ultra, we go to 170. So basically 1440p with global illumination set to high gives you the same FPS as 1080p with global illumination settings set to low. That's how heavy global illumination is. So once again, setting it to ultra, we do have better occlusion, so better graphics fidelity. The shadows are also way more consistent, but the FPS will go down as well, in this case to 120. But imagine You're playing without any kind of upscaling technology and you're still getting 120 FPS here, which is great. And now I'm running at 4K, and like I told you before, it seems that the game engine scales very well with 4K resolution. As we saw before, going from 1080p to 1440p did decrease the performance considerably. For example, around 30-40 FPS, which is a lot. But as soon as we go to 4K, we were having around 120 FPS at 1440p, and we're now having 110 FPS at 4K. It seems that the game scales very well with 4K, and now I'm running it on a 4K panel, and it looks gorgeous. It just looks gorgeous. We're having around 100 FPS at 4K, and again, no upscaling whatsoever. It is what it is, just performing great. Man, this is just very nice. It means that in terms of resolution scaling, in terms of resolution scaling, the game just works, the game engine just works very well, and that's why we're seeing this 4K having almost the same FPS as 1440p, which normally doesn't even happen, like, ever. So now we're running back at 1080p, and we do have some shimmering here and there. And again, one thing that happens with upscaling that I don't really like is when you use the upscaling. In this case, we don't have the DLSS, we only have XTX and FSR, but we can use FSR, and as soon as you use FSR, you lose details. As you can see, in terms of shimmering, it gets much better. You get way less shimmering in the character, as you can see. Basically, even at 1080p upscaling from 720p, the shimmering is gone, which is great, so no shimmering. But again, as soon as you disable upscaling mode, look at the detail. The reflection on the rocks, the lighting itself, the occlusion is just much better. And as soon as you enable FSR or the DLSS or XTX, it just loses detail. The image just gets way duller with way less reflections, way less blooming. I don't really know, but the developers need to fix FSR and so on, because it just doesn't work as intended. It's just not a usual image decrease, it is just that it looks much worse because of the reflections and so on that come with global illumination too, so that's a bummer. In terms of FPS, of course, we get more FPS. We go up to 210, 208, which is less than we had with the NVIDIA card, but what I'm seeing here is that we have a CPU bottleneck. As you can see, the GPU is at 91%, so it means that the 7600X 3D is only able to deliver around, let's say, 200 FPS here, but it should be able to deliver more. Again, it should be able to deliver more, the GPU, but the CPU is bottlenecking it. Once again, 90% at only 200 FPS compared to the 4080 Super that was having around 240 or something like that. But again, we did have the 9800X 3D, and here we have the 7600X 3D, which is considerably slower. And now at 1440p without any kind of upscaling, we're getting around 120 FPS, which is far from bad. Actually quite good, so 120, but again, we were having 120 at 1440p and like 104K, meaning that this game really scales well up to 4K, and that's something that doesn't really happen, well, usually, or like ever. Usually 4K is much heavier than 1440p, and in this case scenario, 4K is just a little heavier than 1440p and looks much better. But again, 1440p 116 looks great. As soon as we enable FSR, look at the details once again, especially the reflections, for example, on these leaves here and here especially. Now look what happens. As soon as we enable FSR, bam, the leaves lose way more detail. This is the part that loses more detail, of course. We have less shimmering, but we have way less detail on the ground, on the leaves, on the foliage. It just looks much worse. Again, as you can see, more detail. As soon as we enable the upscaling, it looks kind of dull. Kind of odd, actually. But in terms of FPS, of course, it increases the FPS to around 160, which is considerably more than we were having before with the 120. So yeah, and the CPU is kind of bottlenecking a bit here, not much, not entirely, but still a bit. because it is still at 93% even though we have 400 watts power usage, meaning that it is not an entire CPU bottleneck, but the CPU is still bottlenecking to some extent, and we need to be careful about that, I guess. But yeah, performs well. Now let's try 4K and see how it goes. At 4K we're once again running at 110 FPS, which is great for 4K, and again, it seems like this game was made to be played at 4K. The engine was made with 4K focus, as 4K runs really well. It's actually very impressive how well it runs. Of course, we're talking about top tier GPUs, but we're also talking about 4K, and we're talking about no upscaling whatsoever. No upscaling, no frame generation, and the maximum global illumination settings, and still we're getting over 100 FPS, which is great. Now, as soon as you enable the FSR, again, you lose a lot of detail, even with FSR quality. If you look at the character, of course that the character has some shimmering. Even at 4K it has some shimmering. It is there. The foliage and everything is just looking great, amazing, but the character does have some shimmering when moving. So basically when you're moving like this, the shimmering goes away, but when you're standing and the character is like doing its movement thing, we do have some shimmering. As soon as you enable FSR, the ambient gets much duller with much less reflections, but we do get way less shimmering in the character. But we do have some ghosting. For example, when we move like this, we do have some ghosting, something that I don't like. But if we're talking about FPS, it's even crazier that with FSR we have less FPS than in native. And again, I don't really understand what's going on, but I can tell you right away that this game is kind of broken. Again, if we go for balance, for example, we get now 111, which is not much than we were having before, and now at performance mode we finally go up to 130. But the game is kind of bugged, or the engine is kind of bugged, I don't really know. But if you look once again, we're having 130 FPS with performance mode with FSR, which makes no sense, and we have generally less quality. As soon as we go to off, we take off any kind of upscaling, we are running native 4K and the performance is basically the same while looking much better. Honestly, I don't really know what's going on with Path of Exile, but it seems that native rendering at higher resolutions works very well with this game, and I'm really proud of it. I'm not proud though that FSR and DLSS aren't working properly, especially at 4K too, which is odd, honestly, very odd. And well guys, that's all for today's testing of Path of Exile. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you want me to test other cards, like the mid-tier cards for example, just let me know, like for example, or even the low-tier cards or the lower-tier cards like the 4060 and the 7600 XT. If you want me to test them, just leave a comment here and I will. Honestly, the game performs very well, even with global illumination settings set to maximum. Again, we're talking about top tier GPUs, but it seems that this game was made with 4K in mind, and it works very well at 4K, sometimes even better at native rendering than upscaling somehow. But I guess once again the game is bugged, it's still kind of beta, but so far so good, and I've been enjoying the game a lot. Really, if you're thinking about getting Path of Exile, the game is just, honestly for me, it's much better than the first one in terms of animations, skills, visuals, of course, much better. Definitely worth buying. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you in the next video.